gives an advantage to anybody doing free software, namely they can use my code in it, over anyone making proprietary software who's not allowed to use my code in it. And I want to give free software projects an advantage over non-free software projects. Free software projects build the free world, and proprietary software projects subjugate people. And so when companies see a copylefted program, often they decide that the best thing for them to do is to cooperate in improving the free version. Since they don't have the option of making a proprietary version, and they want a version with certain features to be out there because it suits their business model, the best thing for them to do is contribute to the free software. Now, when you put the license on your program, you need to do it in a clear way. Otherwise, you risk creating avoidable legal uncertainty for users, and that is a bad thing. Now, GitHub is a very bad influence on our community. Most of the programs in GitHub don't carry any license. They're not free software. It would be better if they didn't exist. And you can't be safe in using them. I mean, maybe the developers aren't likely to sue you personally, but still, they haven't ever given people permission to redistribute and use these programs. But when they do put on a free license, they often do it in a way that is not clear. For instance, sometimes they just put the license in a README file alongside dozens or hundreds of other files that don't say anything about their license. Well, when you look at it in the repository, you can get the feeling they probably meant that license to cover those source files, but they didn't, even though they failed to say so. But really, they should say so. They should say in each file, the license for this file is such and such. When they use the GNU GPL, there's another thing you need to say in the source file, and that is which GPL versions you mean. Nowadays, many free licenses have say that users can use a later version of the license if they wish. The Creative Commons licenses do this. The MPL does this. Some other licenses do this. And maybe that's a better way. But in 1989, when I wrote version 1 of the GNU GPL, it seemed to me that it was more correct to give each software developer of his choice to either say GPL version N or GPL version N or later versions. So you've got to say on the source file which one it is. If you don't say, no one can tell. The GPL itself mentions both possibilities. It doesn't give a default. So when someone puts GPL version 3, for instance, into a license file, we don't know if that means GPL version 3 only or GPL version 3 or later. The place you say that is in the source file, in the notice at the top of the file that comes after the copyright notice and says this file may be distributed under terms of GPL version 3 or any later version published by the Free Software Foundation. You've got to say there which versions are permitted. Please don't ever fail to say this. Please spread the word. Sloppiness on this is inviting lots of confusion and lossage. And it's a real shame that GitHub continues to encourage the sloppiness. A lot of people have put I'm sure of those people who have put programs in GitHub with no license, more than half must think it's free software. It's a job of education that we need to do. Now, once you've installed a completely free system, oh, I should mention one other thing. If you're developing a useful free program that runs on the GNU system, and you'd like it to be a GNU package, just write to us. If your program is good, we would like to make it a GNU package. We have people who will evaluate it, perhaps make suggestions to how to make it fit the GNU system better, and then it can be a GNU package. So, once you have a completely free operating system installed, your browser may still be running non-free programs that come in web pages. They're typically written in JavaScript. Those programs get installed silently into the browser just by browsing. The browser doesn't mention to you that it's running a program that came from the site, and it doesn't check whether the program is free or not. Some of those programs are free. Most of them are non-free. To be free, it has to carry a license statement and point you to the source. So we developed Libra.js, which is an add-on for Firefox to check whether the program's either trivial or free. In those cases, it runs. In the other cases, it blocks the program. Our browser, IceCat, is obviously a modified Firefox with two kinds of improvements. One is it has Libra.js, and the other is it turns off many kinds of things that would enable websites to snoop on you. So it's a good thing to use to protect your privacy also. There's another way to lose your control of your computing, and that is to let it be done in somebody else's server. There are lots of services that offer to do your computing for you, and it's a mistake to accept any of them ever, because then you don't have control over that computing. It's equivalent to running a proprietary program. We call this service as a software substitute, or SaaS, because it's a service that offers itself as a substitute for running a program yourself. In order to have control over your computing activity, you've got to do it with your copy of a free program. If you're doing it with Google's copy or Yahoo's copy of a free program, or, it's not under your control, it's under the control of Google or Yahoo or whatever. So, we want freedom, but there are obstacles to overcome. One of them is the companies that subjugate users with proprietary software get lots of money, and they use this money to build up obstacles to freeing yourself. Sometimes these obstacles take the form of the network effect. People pressure their peers into running the same proprietary program that they're using. Skype is a good example. If you run a proprietary program, first of all, you're the victim. Your freedom is being taken away. But if your use pressures other people to use it, then you are helping to take away the freedom of other people. In other words, you're a victim co-perpetrator. That's what happens when there's a network effect pushing people to be victims of an injustice. They're victim co-perpetrators, and it's important to refuse to do that. So I absolutely refuse to use Skype. I won't use it on someone else's computer either. If someone asks to use Skype to talk to me, I say, absolutely not. So we have to protest these companies when they show up. Now, another obstacle is the concept of open source, which is just an amoral, apolitical substitute for the free software movement. It's not a movement. That's the whole point. Not to be a movement. Not to say, this must be done. It's the open source non-movement. And that's why it's an inferior substitute, because it's not a movement. Because it doesn't say that is mistreating people. We must not be mistreated. We must not mistreat others. That's the core of the free software movement. We must not let non-free software mistreat us, and we must not develop non-free software because that would mistreat others. The whole point of open source was not to say anything about should, not to address this issue of justice. So, where we say where we want freedom and community, open source supporters say that the value is better code quality. It's just a practical choice. We say you must, as a software developer, respect the user's freedom. They say, as a software developer, you might find it useful to let users improve your code. They present it as if nothing but the developer's own interests were pertinent to the issue. And that's the fundamental mistake. Unfortunately, they were the majority in 1998 when they coined that term. Most people had views that were more open source than free software. And the companies because most of them made proprietary software too, they certainly didn't want to promote the free software idea, so they started saying open source. The politicians and the journalists followed the business, the money, and since then the mainstream media talk about open source almost exclusively. It's up to us to compensate for that by always saying free software or Libre software. You don't have to use the term open source. I never use it. I mention it. I cite it to express my disagreements with that idea. I never use that to talk about what I'm doing, because I want to promote the free software idea as much as I can in my activities. If you agree with the free software activity, the free software idea, please do the same. We need that kind of support. And remember, it's not enough just to be inwardly in agreement. That's good, but that's not helping. But when you show your views to others, that's helping. Now, another big obstacle is secret hardware specs that require reverse engineering to make free drivers or free firmware. If you want to make a big technical contribution, the biggest possible one, do reverse engineering, figure out the specs of the hardware so someone else can write a free replacement program to run that hardware. By the way, we also need work on free reverse engineering tools. Very important area if you're interested in working on something that will make a real difference. But don't assume that contributing means developing software. Don't assume that contributing has to be technical. What we need most is activists, people who want to organize free software activist groups, people who want to give talks like this one to spread the idea of free software, people who will write articles to explain to other people the issue here and why we need free software, why non-free software can't be trusted. We need to teach exclusively free software in schools. And this is for various reasons. The school has a social mission to educate good citizens of a society that is strong, capable, independent, cooperating, and free. In the field of computing, that means graduating people who are accustomed to using free software and ready to live in a free digital society. But the school should not just do this, it should say why it's doing this. It should teach them the civic values of free software, to understand why it would be wrong for the school to teach a non-free program. giving non-free software to kids to use is like giving them tobacco. It's implanting dependence. And nowadays, many schools require their students to use non-free software. Often the students are given tablets with non-free software that snoop on them, and it doesn't matter a damn what promises the company makes that the student's data is going to, because privacy statements are worthless. If you need to be concerned with what the privacy statement promises, you shouldn't be using the system. Parents need to fight against the violations of their children's privacy. If the school makes an account in a company's server in the name of the student, that is already violating the student's privacy. The school must drop that kind of practice. It must never put any data about the students, even their names, on a company's server unless it's in encrypted form as a backup, so that the company can't tell what's in that backup. Then it's safe. But there's another issue. Schools should teach good citizenship, the habit of helping other people around you. So, every class should have this rule. Students, if you bring software to class, you may not keep it for yourself. You must share it with the rest of the class, including the source code, in case someone here wants to learn, because this class is a place where we share our knowledge. Therefore, it's not permitted to bring proprietary software to class except to do reverse engineering on it. The school has to follow its own rule to set a good example. So it must bring only free software to class and share copies of the source code with anyone that wants a copy, except in the case of exercises for reverse engineering study. Because you shouldn't release the answers until the students have turned in their work. In that case, the source code is the answer to the exercise. But it's also necessary for education in programming. Every program embodies knowledge. It's a mistake to equate software with knowledge. That's not true. But every program embodies some knowledge. If it's proprietary, it withholds that knowledge from the students. So it's the enemy of education. But if it's free, it offers the knowledge to the student. Schools must show their loyalty to the spirit of education. That must be the number one principle in everything they do. Therefore, schools must not tolerate proprietary software on campus except for reverse engineering. So I don't have enough time, so if you're saying you agree, if we had more time, it would be good. I'd be glad, but let me go ahead. So, how do you learn to write good, clear code? You do it by reading lots of code and writing lots of code. Well, only free software lets you read the code of large programs we use. Then you got to write lots of code. If you want to learn to write code for large programs, you've got to write lots of code for large programs, but you have to start small in doing it. How do you start small writing code for large programs? By writing small changes for existing large programs. Then you can move on to bigger changes and bigger until eventually you can write a new large program, which is really changing a large program starting from zero. Only free software gives you the chance to write changes of any size in existing large programs that we really use. Every school can offer students the opportunity to master the craft of programming if it is a free software school, as they all should be. Human rights depend on each other. If you lose one, it becomes hard to maintain the rest. And now that we use computing for so many vital activities in our lives, control of our computing, in other words, free software, is one of the human rights we must insist on and defend. So sometimes that requires a sacrifice. People who won't make any practical sacrifice to keep their freedom will lose their freedom. We can't make people value freedom. But when they don't, we can point out to others how foolish they are. Sometimes I've suggested this program is mistreating you, you could switch to that free program. And they say, well, that free program is not quite as convenient. And when you give me a free program that does absolutely everything this proprietary program does, and does it just as well and just as conveniently, then I'll switch. What they are really saying is, for them, the value of freedom is zero, so zero is the size of sacrifice they're willing to make for it. People like that will not have freedom. They will be crushed. But we can point to them as examples for others to learn from. How do you help our movement? Well, if you're a good programmer, write free software. Contribute to 15 existing projects before you start writing your own. You need to learn how to handle a project. And you learn that by participating in projects that are run by others and doing a good job of advancing those projects in cooperation with the main developers. Then you'll know how to be a main developer yourself. But you may not have skill at programming, so then you can organize free software activism. You can become a speaker. You can do the secretarial work to keep the organization going. It's also important. You can persuade schools and governments to switch to free software. For schools, look at GNU.org/education. For governments, look at GNU.org/government. The government does its computing for the people. It has a duty to the people to maintain full control over that computing, which means do it with exclusively free software and reject service as a software substitute. Help other users. If you're an expert user, then helping other people get what they want from GNU/Linux is a useful thing to do. You could join a GNU/Linux user group or start one. And if there is one, but it's called a Linux user group, you can help show them why they should change their name. It's treating us unfairly to call the GNU system Linux. We started almost a decade before Torvalds started Linux. We did a bigger part of the job. We deserve at least equal mention. To call the GNU system Linux is to deny us credit for our work and give that credit to someone else. And the worst part is, he's an open source supporter. He won't try to teach people to demand freedom in their computing. So please don't treat us wrong. Please call the system GNU/Linux every time. Give us equal mention. I think we deserve that much for the work we've done. And by doing it, you'll also be helping the free software movement. People will understand what we did, so they will see why they should listen to what we say. And above all, say free software rather than open source. Say free software and Libre software as often as you can, in every context where it makes sense to mention it. That's an opportunity. Don't ask, do I have to mention free software here? Think, is this a useful place for me to mention free software? Will my visible support for the movement help? And if the answer is yes, then use the opportunity. Now, I'm sure everyone here is aware that software and computing are a disaster for privacy. In fact, digital technology may have made the world much, much worse. If we don't defeat massive digital surveillance, one way we can resist it is by running free software. But that only resists snooping on us through our own computers. There are systems to snoop on people that we use but we don't own. ISPs, for instance, phone companies. It's harder to protect ourselves there. In some cases, there is technology we can use to protect ourselves. I protect myself from ISPs by browsing through Tor. But there are other systems that we can't stop or we can't refuse to use. You know, systems keeping track of our prescriptions. I don't trust those systems. And not only because they can be snooping on people for unjust purposes, but because they can be turned into arms for the war on pain sufferers. And that's basically equivalent to torture, making, not me at the moment, but I've experienced this briefly, having pain so bad I wished I were dead. But there are people who go through that for years or decades. And their lives can be turned into torture by not allowing them to get the painkiller they need. And that's the way things are going in the U.S. today. And then there are the cameras on the street that recognize license plates or people's faces. They're working on technology to track people around the city from camera to camera. I believe that it's fundamentally inadequate as a solution to restrict the use of the data once accumulated. The data will be misused. It will be misused officially because our government's rules for using it have such loopholes that it can get away with doing anything it wants. But even if it had rules that actually limited the use, the data would be misused by rogue employees and by crackers through data breaches. And so we need to do more than limit the use of these databases. We need to prevent them from being made. It's the accumulation of the data that we have to stop. And the one way that works well is that if we legally require systems to be designed so that they don't accumulate data about people anywhere, it's not so easy to change them. The laws, imaginary, hypothetical laws restricting the use of databases could be changed in a week by passing a different law, and then all the old data could be misused. However, if a system was designed in accord with a law that says it can't accumulate data, to change it to accumulate data would be hard work, especially if there are many such systems scattered around the country. So we're much safer with systems that are designed not to accumulate data. And I wrote an article called "How Much Surveillance Can Democracy Withstand?", which presents the absolute limit on the level of surveillance that is compatible with democracy. When the state knows where everyone goes and who talks with whom, democracy will be crushed because the state can always find the whistleblowers and put them in prison. And the state, of course, tries to put whistleblowers in prison. But why do we need them? You see, it's because we need them for democracy. Democracy means that the people control what the state does. But in order to control it, we have to know what the state does. When the state acts secretly and does nasty things that we would want to stop it from doing, how can we stop it? We need a whistleblower to show us what the state is really doing. We need heroes like Edward Snowden. And there's something that we should do. 3 cheers for Edward Snowden. Hip, hip, hooray! Hip, hip, hooray! Hip, hip, hooray! There are still politicians that want to put him in prison. So we have to stand up for him very visibly and firmly when we have a chance. So if it takes the knowledge and clear thinking of a Snowden to blow the whistle and not be put in prison, there are not going to be enough whistleblowers. Democracy is therefore in danger. So we must make sure that the state doesn't in general know where people go and who talks with whom. We must limit all the kinds of surveillance systems. What? Yes. We need to legally require systems to be designed so they do not accumulate data about people. We need anonymous e-commerce where you can pay to download something and the site doesn't know who's paying, but it knows it got its money. We have developed a program for this called GNU Taler. It's not a currency, it's a payment system. It's anonymous about the payer, but it's not anonymous for the payee, so it can't be used for tax evasion. It's true that that won't block all tax evasion, because when laws allow companies to dodge taxes, we can't stop it this way. We've got to stop that through political activity against plutocracy. That's why I supported Bernie Sanders and why I do not support Clinton. So that article, which is found in gnu.org/philosophy/surveillance-vs-democracy.html, and by the way, we always put dashes between words. It lists many technical methods for getting various jobs done without contributing to massive surveillance. I believe, for instance, that it should be illegal to operate a scheme to systematically watch people on the street, even if it operates by asking millions of people to upload photos of other people on the street. The scheme should, taking a photo of someone occasionally and posting it must be legal. Having a scheme to organize to do this to track people should be a crime. So now I better do the auction, so I have a little time for questions. And I will skip presenting St. Ignatius, sorry, but time presses. So this is an adorable GNU that needs a home. So I'm going to auction it for the benefit of the Free Software Foundation. If you buy it, I can sign the card for you. If you have a penguin at home, you need a GNU for the penguin. A penguin can't hardly function without a GNU. There should never be a penguin without a GNU. We can accept payment in cash, by a check, or with a bank card if it can make phone purchases. And we can also accept Bitcoin. If you have something here you can make the payment in. The problem is Bitcoin payments take so long. I don't know if you could show me nowadays that the payment has been completed. When you bid, please wave your arm and shout the amount you're bidding. Don't wait for me to look at you before you shout. It's the opposite. Shout so I will look at you. And the starting price is $25. Do I get $25 for this? $25? Do I get 30? $30. I've got 30. Do I get 35? 35. I've got 35. Do I get 40? 40. I've got 40. Do I get 45? $45. I've got, she said 45 first. Do I get 50? $50. I've got 50. Do I get 55? 55. Do I get 60? $60. Do I get 65? 65. Who's speaking? 65. Okay, do I get 70? $80. I've got $80. Do I get 85? $100. I've got 100. Do I get 110? I've got 100. Do I get 110? Who said that? 125. Okay, I've got 125. Do I get 135? For this adorable. How much? What?
135. Yeah.
135. Do I get 150? I've got 135. Do I get 150? I've got 150. Do I get 160?
200.
I've got 200. Now that's getting there. I was expecting to get high bids here. Do I get 220? I've got 200. Do I get 220 for this adorable? 220 to the Free Software Foundation to defend freedom. Last chance to bid 220 or more.
225.
No, okay. I've got 225. Do I get 250?
300.
I've got 300. I've got 300. Do I get 330 for this adorable canoe? 330 to the Free Software Foundation to defend freedom. Do I get 330 or more? Last chance to bid 330 or more. Last chance. Going. Gone for 300. Please come up and pay. Please come up and pay. How do you wish to pay? How? Okay, yeah, credit cards works, but also going to an ATM and getting the money out and coming back will work. I can't hear anything you're saying. I'm hard of hearing. What?
ATM, cash.
Okay, good. I'll hang around here near the door of this room until you come back. So, now it's time for questions, but I have hearing problems. Where's the microphone for questioners? Okay, so speak loud, clearly, and slowly. Pronounce each consonant carefully so I can hear it. By the way, you can join the Free Software Foundation. You can do that here. Come up to me. Or you can do it through fsf.org if you do e-commerce.
Okay, so I guess I'll start off. I'm curious if you are developing software, let's say for a commercial purpose, but you do ultimately want to open source it.
Let's not talk about open source. I'm not in favor of open source. It's an idea I disagree with. I will not have a discussion about open source.
Okay. So you just want to make it free software then ultimately, but you do want to use it for commercial purpose first. There are certain
That's fine. First of all, there are several things I need to explain here. One is free software doesn't say it can't be used for commercial purposes. Businesses can use it. They can use it for anything. Anybody who gets a copy can use it. Second, free software doesn't mean it has to be released. You can write a program yourself and use it yourself, and it's free software because every user has the 4 freedoms. All one of the users have the 4 freedoms, so it's free software for all one of them. And if someday you decide to release it, then I hope you release it with a free software license so the other users get it as free software. But the free software movement doesn't say you must release every program you write. It says when you do release a program, you must not do it in a way that subjugates the other users. So there's no difficulty with that at all. But in fact, it's quite possible to release the program as free software and use it yourself in some commercial way and make money.
And is there some, amount of time that you think that's reasonable or ethical to release it within?
So don't I have 10 more? This says 10 before 1:50. Should have 10 minutes. It is? Oh, maybe it lost time when it fell apart. Okay.
I was just wondering, is there some specific amount of time you think that is maximum ethical?
No.
No.
When you release it as free software. The 4 freedoms are not required. They're all optional. You do them when you want to do them. You're not required to run the program. You're not required to study and change the source code. You're not required to distribute exact copies. You're not required to distribute copies of a modified version. You're free to do any of them when you wish. But none of them is mandatory.
Dr. Stallman, let me first say thank you very much for coming. It's a privilege to have the opportunity to attend your talk. Now, earlier in your talk, you spoke of computers and computing as a means to an end so that people can do things. However, there are critical, fundamental usability problems with free software, as we saw when you yourself were unable to get your laptop to communicate with
That
the
was their
presentation
problem.
board.
Their system's problem. It wasn't wrong. My laptop was working just fine.
Dr. Stallman, we have had many people giving talks in the last couple of days, very few, if any, of whom have had that kind of difficulty.
They said that a cable had come loose.
Okay.
You're bullshitting. This is utter bullshit. Since we have so little time,
I'm not
get
done,
lost.
sir, if I may.
Get lost.
If I
I'll talk
may.
to the next person.
You spoke with contempt of users who choose. You say that
That's
they
right.
do not
I
take
have
interest in
contempt
freedom.
for fools.
You are contemptuous of
Yes,
people. At
right,
the same time, your
absolutely.
rhetoric speaks of freedom for all. How do you
Right,
reconcile this
absolutely.
contradiction, sir?
Absolutely. Because when I respect people's freedom to make a decision, I can also have contempt for them if they make a decision I think is utterly foolish. Those two are entirely compatible. To respect people, to say people can use a proprietary program, can shoot up cocaine, I can still say it's a totally stupid thing to do and you shouldn't do it.
Sometimes you want to.
Hi, my name's Luke Layton. I'm a software Libra developer of 20 years, and I've just started doing hardware development as well as Libra hardware. So, now, my question is a bit of a leading question, I must apologize, is what hardware is available for people that
Look
respect
at
their-
fsf.org/resources/HW for that information.
Fantastic.
Be brief. Now, next question.
Hey, Rich.
Oh, and by the way, if you're concerned with free hardware designs, look at gnu.org/philosophy/freehardwaredesigns.html. If you're in the maker community, you've got to fight to establish forges that only permit free designs for useful objects.
Keep advocating freedom while putting limits on freedom.
It's limits on what a given organization will do. For instance, the FSF can't stop you from making or running a non-free program, but it's up to us whether we're going to recommend it. We won't host a non-free program on our repository, because if we did, we would be partially responsible for the loss of freedom that those programs would impose on others. But, this kind of argument, it's fundamentally mistaken, and I've heard it thousands of times. I summarize it with a haiku. Using GPL is infringing on our rights to infringe, encroaching on our rights to encroach on yours. They think they're entitled to use our code to subjugate other people, and if we say, no, you can't use our code that way, they think we're doing them wrong, but they want to restrict their users much, much more than that. They don't want their users to be able to change the code at all. They want it to be proprietary, but they think it's okay for them to do that to other people, and when we say, yes, you can use our code, just respect other people's freedom with it, they think we're doing wrong. Now, this is clearly morally contradictory, but it makes sense to them.
Hey, Richard. I recently
installed a new Linux distribution on my MacBook, dual booted, and it was really a rough ride. Do you have any practical suggestions? For
I wouldn't
maybe,
know
like,
anything about it.
Oh, not
that's
for
not
that.
my field.
No, just
sorry.
for like what computer you would suggest to
Oh,
install
well,
new
I
Linux
use-
on, and
this
what
is-
distribution.
Look at what I said. This is a computer that runs a free system and a free BIOS. There are many computers that can run a totally free system. Look at the information about your favorite totally free GNU/Linux distro. It'll say, I suppose, which models it can run on easily. But, dual booting is just a step. You got to erase the non-free system in order to the goal is to get the non-free software out of your life if you don't want it to be attacking your freedom anymore. So dual booting is a step there, and it's an important step, but it doesn't get all the way there. Don't forget to take the next step.
Hi, Richard. I karmically owe you a comment that has no question mark at the end. So I just want to say, I think it's a shame that you're ignoring all of the wonderful work that's going on under the banner of open source software to help enable people
It's free
to
software.
help enable people to use things which you don't seem to have any kind of concrete plan for the distribution.
I think you're
or
mistaken.
the dissemination of your software or
I
the
think you're
training of
mistaken
everyday
about the
users.
facts.
Except that you've not done anything for training everyday users to understand how to get up to
Please,
the level of doing the things that you want to do.
identifying two separate things.
Listen, man.
The programs you're talking about, almost all of them are free software,
All
and
I'm
I think
saying
they're
is
fine.
that turnabout is fair play.
You're just making a mistake. I'm not doing what you said, and you just have misunderstood the facts. The programs that you're talking about, the programs you're talking about, the work you're talking about, almost all of it is free software. And if I saw those projects, I'd say, what you're doing is good. I just think it's a shame you call it open source. I'm not criticizing those projects or those people. I'm saying that they're supporting a cause I don't agree with in not saying free software. And if there's some job that we should be doing that we're not doing, well, remember, we're a bunch of volunteers, and what we do is what people join us to do. And we probably should do more. So come join and do more for the free software movement.
Hello. I just want to say that in keeping with Richard's philosophy that this talk will not be available afterwards on the stream. If you want a copy of it, go see Ted out there. Give him a little time to get it together. It's 2 hours, so it's going to be 2 DVDs. And, I beg forgiveness from St. Ignatius for the fact that we did use non-proprietary software to stream it live, but we hope to make up for it, by making it only available via DVD afterwards.
Yeah, there's always explosive.